Okay, it's my real pleasure now to welcome Peggy Renders to our ADAPT International Women's Day program of interviews with influential and I guess significant leaders within the local Australian marketplace. Now, Peggy is currently Chief Customer Officer for Telstra Enterprise and Business. And prior to that, Peggy held many leadership roles, including, I would say, a significant number of years at SAP, Peggy, over the years as well. And really finding yourself in this very strong leadership position at Telstra here today. So Peggy, welcome. Thanks for joining us here today.
My pleasure, Matt. Great being here.
Excellent. Now, I guess to start off, Peggy, it's always interesting because you're at this sort of very strong leadership position right now within Telstra. I'd love to get a bit more of a sense of your journey, if you like. What kind of got you from, I guess, the beginnings of your career through to where you are today, and perhaps some of the particular challenges you might have faced over the years in IT, and potentially, I guess, how you might have navigated some of those as well.
All right, so I think my career background is maybe not a very usual one because it spans across multiple different areas in tech and advisory, but it also spans across multiple continents and countries. So I started in Belgium in audit, IT audit. Didn't last very long in that, Matt, because what I didn't like about the audit side, well, you get to understand processes really well and process improvement, but it's all about correcting and telling customers where they don't get it right, where I'm more about how do we make it better for everyone. So I very quickly stepped into consulting, strategic advisory, and then joined SAP about 3 years in. And SAP that was in Belgium, very quickly moved to Germany to headquarters. And the roles I've done there were really around from consulting into advisory and in the area of financials and business improvement, and then into business intelligence, data warehousing. And then started working really with big customers in Germany. That was across Europe, so Spain, Italy, France, Portugal, beautiful part of the world. And then in 2005 came to Australia, where I got to work with big customers, BHP, Australia Post, a lot in mining, and moved then into APAC and also moved into leadership roles. So my first real people management role goes back to when I had children, goes back to 2012, something like that. And very quickly realized then that leadership is what I enjoy most, because you still get to work with customers, but you can actually work with people and inspire them that they can create something different for themselves and really helping people having more impact and enjoying more what they do. With SAP, as you said, for a long time, and that was all around business process improvements and applications, and advising customers on that. And then about 2 years ago, I joined Telstra in the chief customer role, coming back to Australia and working with everything about Telstra is Australian based, from product development all the way to sales and delivery, which was different, is different than the world I came from with SAP, where you're more like a regional or a local sales office, and it's more around the sales part of that. So it's been an amazing journey for me. And you also asked me for the biggest lessons learned or maybe challenges that I've faced. And they kind of vary depending on the level of maturity in the roles I was operating in, but also the countries and regions I was involved in. I think very early on, the biggest challenge, and it became imminent when I moved to Australia in 2005, was how do you get your voice heard in a male-dominated industry? And I think Australia has more of a challenge with that. If I compare that to, for example, Europe. But then in Europe, my roles were not as senior as the ones I've done in Australia. So when you're trying to push through the ranks, it's more about how do you make your voice more heard. So that was a big challenge that I've overcome. Then the other big challenge that stands out for me is, as a female, you play many different roles in life. You play the role of an employee, a leader, but also the role of a mother and a partner. So how do you combine those different roles? And I think motherhood and having a career, that's probably the biggest one to work through. And for me, that was a really beautiful one, because motherhood made me realize that I want to be a people leader, because they're quite similar, being a parent and being a people leader. Those would probably be the main ones, Matt, that I would like to. Oh, maybe the last one is, how do you step into bringing all of you to work, and you create your own path versus listening to people creating that path for you. So how do you drop into your gut feel and where you want to go versus the career track that others might have plotted out for you?
That's a really good point, isn't it? So as you sort of think about that, Peggy, in terms of really, showing up as your true self to develop your own sort of path and think about what that needs to be. Have you found that, if you like, and you mentioned some of the differences between Australia and Europe, for example, has that been easier here or more difficult here, do you think? Is there more of an expectation that, we will do this and you will kind of follow the line, or are you able to sort of, as you say, craft that own path yourself?
I think it has been easier in Australia, because I find that in Australia there is a lot of entrepreneurial people and skills. And also I see Australia as the land of opportunity. So I really became more unleashed, let's call it that, when I moved to Australia, because I felt like the Peggy I used to be, or how people know me in Europe, well, I can start here with a blank piece of paper. So what's the life I want to create for myself, and what's the career I want to create for myself? And I probably felt less held back around what people expect of me when I left my childhood and younger years in my career behind in a different continent.
That's great. It's, I guess also, I think from that point of view, if you were advising other women, for example, starting out in technology, then that would, I think what you're saying there is that would be a really good way for them to think about it as well, as right. What do I want to achieve? What do I think I can achieve? Not what's expected of me in many ways, I think is really important. Yeah.
It's not an easy exercise to do, because what you feel often as this is what I want is heavily tainted by how you grew up and the culture you've been raised in and the career paths of people around you. So it's not easy to distinguish what do you actually want versus what is charted out for you in everything you have around you.
Great, that's good, isn't it? I guess sort of building on that a bit more in general, sort of, Peggy, as well. If you think about the Australian technology industry today, and obviously there's so much discussion, not just within tech, but in other parts of industry and government, about how we can really address this gender imbalance which still exists. We see things around diversity targets, 50% of this or 40% of that, which is all well and good. But what's your thoughts, if you like, on the efficacy of some of those programs to encourage women to enter IT? Are we doing enough, or are there other things we should be considering?
I think there is more we can do. So maybe let me touch on what we are doing and what I think is working. And then maybe I see more areas of opportunity. So it always starts as a female, and I don't want to generalize, but I think we often listen to the voice in our head, and it comes back around self-confidence and how we see ourselves versus or what we think, how we think other people perceive us. So a lot of stories, a lot of noise in your head. So how do we help females to have more confidence in themselves and what they're capable of? And what I think is working really well there is mentoring, but also shadowing, and demystify what it means to be a leader in the field of tech. And you do that by letting those females have more exposure to you, but also letting them be part of some of the critical meetings you get into, how you handle yourself in those meetings, that they step away from that with a feeling of, I got this, I can do this too. So that I think is really important. And I personally mentor a lot. I'm always open for people shadowing me. And I think that's a really good part to help with that inner confidence. Then when it comes to more structured programs and organizations around making sure that for every interview you have at least one we have final candidates and you have a finalist, a female finalist. I think that's a good program as well, because it makes people look harder for those female candidates. Because typically females don't put their hand up as quickly as males. And I think it's a stat and a data point that most of us know. The third one I want to touch on is, as senior leaders, when you step into a new remit, being very intentional around bringing in females at the top level. And I had an example of that at Telstra, where I was looking for my financial services and insurance exec leader. And it took me a long time to find that person. And I held off putting someone in, and I had to go through a couple of hiring cycles to finally found the female leader. And I was pretty focused on, I want to have a female, because when I looked at the team that this person had to manage, it really needed that balancing out, because I was convinced it would bring out more of the strengths of the rest of the team by having a female in it. So I'm not saying every role you need to focus on getting a female in there. It's for the right roles and the team that they need to manage. What's the right profile of a leader you need in that team to be successful? The one thing I think we can do more of is, when you start setting targets, for example, on leadership teams, you need to have, say, 50% or 40% females. Not every role is the same. And I still see it when I look at board roles or exec teams, that the core roles, like the heavy ops roles or the sales leadership roles, as well, don't just put them in more the surrounding roles, because it kind of amplifies, I think, the challenge we have, that yes, we have females and their voices are being heard, but we need more females in the core functions of the business.
No, that makes sense. Do you think also, sort of building on that a bit more, Peggy, do you think we almost need to rethink the concept of a role, right? Because we tend to try and stovepipe people into a role rather than think about what are we actually trying to achieve from that role, if that makes sense. Because I think maybe that kind of hamstrings us in many ways in terms of opening our minds to different sort of capabilities and people as well.
Correct. And a role description, or how you think about a role, very often we have the person currently in the role and we're looking for who could do that. But that's the wrong view. I would take a step back and look at, what do we need to achieve in this role, and how you go about achieving that is very different for different people, not just male or female. I never look at a role and think about, I want to do that role similar to how the predecessor has done that. I would more look at, well, what do we need to achieve here? And then how I go about that. It's very different. You have your leadership style, and you need to hold on to that as to how do you get to outcomes is unique. And you need to hold on to that authenticity and that uniqueness. And then linked to that, Matt, is job descriptions, right? When you start your career, look at tech roles and how we come up with job descriptions. There's a lot of technical descriptions in there that might scare people off. And how do we make that description more generic or more open to, this is the outcome we need to get to, it's up to you how you get there?
That's pretty much how we advise organizations as well, Peggy, isn't it? Because ultimately, if they say we want to buy X, Y, Z, well, stop thinking about what you want to buy, think about what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day, right? So it's quite similar in that regard. That's a good point. So building on that as well, if you think about sort of internal sort of professional development of women, I know you talked about that shadowing concept, which I think is really fantastic, because that's showing potential, female leaders, what good looks like, how you need to show up, that sort of thing. But do we need to really sort of double down on rethinking what that professional development looks like within our organizations as well?
Yes, there's still a fair bit of work to be done there. And I think role models, they come in different forms and shapes, and mentoring and shadowing as well. Why do we limit that to the organization you're part of? I mentored people from outside of Telstra. When I was at SAP, I mentored people from outside of SAP. A lot of senior women have a really good exec network and are happy to put their arms around top talent of your organization and spend some time with them to give them a different perspective. So we are in an era of collaboration. We need to collaborate more. And I know, Matt, we talk about that when you think about solving complex business challenges right now. You can't sometimes solve that just within the boundaries of your organization. So how do we collaborate and move forward in that way? It's the same with professional development for females and males. How do we give those people more opportunity to get exposed to more and do more self-reflection on what they've seen, and then think about which areas could they do more on or develop more in, and remove those organizational boundaries as well.
Okay, perfect. And, obviously, Peggy, you've been in technology for a very long time, and we've seen technologies come and go. We've got a lot of, I guess, emerging, exciting technologies coming to the fore at the moment, artificial intelligence, a big focus on data and cyber skills. Are there any areas particularly, if you think about trying to encourage women into tech in terms of, from that technology perspective, which are areas which they really should consider leading into today?
Yes, you touched on all of them. So let's start with the one that is red hot, right? AI. My background is data as well. And even when we were thinking about predictive and models that had to be trained based on data sets, and this goes way back, even then we had concepts around bias, and that if a lot of your programmers have the same background, that bias and how code gets written translates into that. So the outcomes of your models have that bias, that unconscious bias all over it. And there were some absolute disasters that have played out in the last 10 years around models not picking up on what's actually happening. And that's the same with AI. So the guardrails is becoming a really important topic around how much of the decision making and what is playing out do you let being run by AI, and what are the guardrails you put in. So having females, not just females, I would say having a diverse population weaved into every step of that AI, starting from the data sets, starting from what do we learn out of those data sets, which rules, which recommendations are being put forward, has to have a diverse representation, because the world is diverse. We need to have all of those voices heard and how people think coming through that. But then I'm even going further, right, around security. Where do we get into security breaches? What is sensitive? Also there, we need to have that angle on it. But I also keep on coming back to tech is not just the tech. It's also around selling, and it's also around leadership. So around sales, I think females are very well positioned to be in sales roles, but still they're definitely in Australia, it's still seen as a very male dominated world. So how do you make females less risk averse around taking on a quota and getting to outcomes? And then around leadership, completely the same thing. And then the analogy that I made at the beginning around parenthood versus leadership, there is a lot of similarities there. So making people feel comfortable there. And then the last one I want to come back to is around where is technology going around platforms, APIs. How do you link platforms? That needs collaboration. that needs trust and that needs letting go of control and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And those skills, I think females are inherently, females have those skills.
Okay, just I guess finally for you, I'd love to kind of pose a bit of a random question to you. So you're sitting down with an 18-year-old Peggy, okay, in the room together, that kind of thing. And what advice would you give to yourself, if you like, when you're at that point in terms of considering that career in technology? What would be the one thing you would recommend to that person if you think back through everything you've gone through and those sort of starting points, if you like?
Can I give you 3 things instead of 1?
Of course you can. That's right.
So the first one is, I like it if you can ground yourself in a solid foundation. So get into the detail, doing the hard work. I did uni, I did 1 MBA and then I started another one. But getting into the details and the coding and understand how things hang together is really important for the rest of your career, but also for your credibility when you move higher up, but also for your confidence.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say do the hard work, start with that. The second one would then be, what are the stories you tell yourself? And there you need some coaching, because it's very hard to distinguish between what is happening in my head and what is the reality. How do you become more, it's the picture of the young girl versus the old woman, like how you see things. Some good counseling or coaching on that is really good. And then the third one is, I would encourage girls to dream big. And also that's hard because you have mental barriers all over, and I don't think you can ever dream big enough. So how do you strip them all away and have the most amazing vision of what you want your life to be like without being held back by your upbringing and the people around you and the culture and the country where you grew up?
That's fantastic. I like that. You can never dream big enough, Peggy. Fantastic.
No, you can't.
Exactly. All right, Peggy, thank you very much. It's been a really great conversation. Some really good insights and input there for our ADAPT female community as well. So thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it.